guys, let's focus on the overnight moves in Mosaic. Okay, so we've got the Aussie 200 overnight change pre, Aussie 200 overnight change post, overnight Aussie 200 move to overnight high, Aussie 200 move to overnight low, Aussie 200 time of overnight high, and Aussie 200 time of overnight low, and the overnight range. So let's do a quick definition of what all of these are. Let's take yesterday, which was the last day of October, as an example. So Aussie 200 overnight change pre, okay. Again, this is everything essentially outside of the physical market moves, okay? So it's the overnight moves. So if we're looking at yesterday, for instance, I'll zoom in here. Okay, so this was Friday, 31st of October. You can see that the actual day is here. This is Brisbane time here. So we open up 8:50, close at 3 o'clock. So that's kind of what I call the daytime moves. So that's your futures change, rolls into, your XJO change from the prior day, et cetera, et cetera. So the overnight move pre is from the 4 o'clock price prior day. So in this case, it'll be around 8884 through to the overnight close. Okay, so in this case, here is 8901. Okay, so that is the overnight pre. If we're looking at this day in the data, the pre will show you the move from 4 o'clock previous day to the overnight close. Okay, what's next? The post. Okay, so if that's the pre, then the post is the night after. Okay, so in this case, it'll be from here through to here. Okay, so this change will show, if you're looking at this particular day, say you want to see Friday, 31st of October, the overnight pre figure will be the move here, and the post figure will be the move here. Okay, same with if you want to look at the 30th of October here, the post move will be this move, which was the pre for this day, etc., etc. Move to overnight high, move to overnight low. So this is obviously in points. So again, this is just from 4 o'clock prior day, post day. So it's always looking for the times and so what I'll just back a step here. The pre's already happened given what you're looking at, okay? So that's kind of an input into trying to predict, okay, well, what's going to happen today, the day that's coming. So if you're doing a morning kind of session here, working through, trying to look at what the bias is for the day, you use your pre as an input, okay? The post, why I've got all the overnight, highs, lows, times, et cetera, under the post is that we're then looking at, okay, this happened today. Okay, let's try and predict what's going to happen overnight. So these are always posts. So again, if we looked up this for 31st of October, you'd see that the move to overnight high for the 8893 was the 4 o'clock Sydney time close. 8893 high is 8911. I'll get my maths going here. 93 to 11 is what, 18? So that would be 18 points. And the time of high would be 10 o'clock. Okay, so I just break it up into hourly periods there. The low, again, if you were looking at the Friday, 31st of October, closing price was 8893 when the market actually closed. The low was 8850. 93 to 50 is 43. So the the move to points move to low. This one here would say negative 43, and the time would be 2 a.m. Okay. And as I just mentioned, time of overnight high, time of overnight low. The overnight range is simply the difference between these two. Okay, so range would be 62. All right, so okay, let's dig into when and why you'd kind of do. Well, why I've got the range in my front of mind. You know, something that you could look at there is like, okay, the Aussie futures today have just completely dumped. Let's say they've dropped, 120 or more points. Well, you can have a look at, where are we? The overnight range, okay? You can be expecting, definitely upwards of 70 points historically and more likely 120 points plus. So, that just helps you in terms of, okay, say we're in that position, we've fallen 50 points, in the evening, it's starting to turn around. You think, the US is going high, you think it's going to be a big rebound. You can pretty comfortably, trade on the fact that, say we've dropped 50 points, the likely range is going to be, say, 120 minimum, excluding that one. So that's kind of where you might set your target around that point there, as an example. What else can we look at? All right, so let's go take back a step here. Why do we want to know what the overnight move is, okay? That obviously gives us a sense of the pre-positioning for the day, all right? As I said in the earlier video, that's essentially kind of an algorithm as to, okay, the S&P's done this, commodities, FX, all the rest of it. Our market should open 50 points lower, okay? It makes sense. If the US has dumped 100 points, we're probably going to, that basket of 200 shares is probably going to open lower than where it was yesterday. And this number here will just give you a sense of where the market is expecting, how bad it's expecting that 200 shares to open lower. So let's have a look at, okay, so let's take that example and go, okay, S&P's fallen, say, 50 points or more, and the Aussie overnight has not really fallen. It's pretty much stayed flat or higher, okay? So the US is dumped, and for whatever reason on these dates here, FOMC, Fed minutes, CPI, things like that, generally, our market's held up pretty well, considering. Then you can start looking at going, and that divergence is something I talk about a bit. Then you can start looking at, okay, what are the likely, XJO changes today, futures changes, RTH changes. One thing that I'll probably highlight here is I think that most people without this kind of data behind them would probably think, hey, we're well overvalued here compared to what the S&P has done. I'm going to short. I think it should readjust down to where the other markets are. You can see, 100% of the time we've rallied at least 18 points from market open from 10 o'clock. And 8 out of 9 times we've rallied at least 35 points to highs with some pretty massive numbers here. So that gives you a really good indication. Again, just stops you, potentially sometimes this stuff just stops you from doing, something stupid, which I'm very, very inclined to do. What else have we got here? Let's give another example where, okay, let's say prior day XJO's fallen and the futures have fallen. So again, it doesn't mean that they're always the same, these two. But in this case, let's filter for when the XJO's fallen, so that means that that basket of 200 has ended lower than the day before, so it's actually, you know, bearish, as well as that futures change from the open in the morning to the close is also down. So it's pretty much everyone's kind of heading for the exit at a more accelerated rate than was expected. So let's have a look at that, and then the overnight move is higher. So let's say, again, let's just pick 40 points and just say, okay, we've had a collapse yesterday, and then overnight, for whatever reason, we've rallied back. Something that I'll kind of pull out here is when you look at the move, the time of day highs here, you'll find that about half are in that first hour. You can see that never in the last 5 years have we found a top between 11 and 12 o'clock. Okay, so, you know, things like that is, so again, we've collapsed the prior day, we've rallied overnight. If I was staunchly in the short camp for the day, I'd probably want to hold those shorts or add to those shorts at least for the first hour, just to see, you know, if it is going to top and roll over. If I was long, I'd definitely be looking for confirmation of break of that 11 o'clock high, that first hour high, to really double down on my long conviction, okay? Because you can see if it breaks that high, then you're pretty much in the clear in terms of end of day moves, okay? So again, this is a 10 to 4 p.m. change. You can see that, you know, you've got one out of however many's there, 15, that has turned around and ended lower after it breaks that first hour high. So just an example of that one. What else? Can do it around events. So let's look at, you know, if we take post CPI, so the day after CPI, let's do a negative change. So that's basically saying on CPI day, again, because we're looking at the day after CPI and we're looking back and saying, okay, the overnight into the day after CPI is negative. So what that's saying is it's sold off after CPI overnight. You can see that, what do we got here? 17 out of the 20 will continue higher the night after, okay? So fallen after CPI overnight. You can look at the next night, that move is higher 17 out of 20 times. So it's those kind of insights that I find are really, really valuable. I spoke about what happens if the Aussie falls a heap. You know, another way, and we haven't really got to the US and the UK yet, but, you know, you can start looking at, okay, say the US-Asia session has rallied significantly, and you think that the Aussie hasn't kept pace during the day, okay? So through our session, Asia session, US has just rocketed, okay? And you might think for whatever reason, okay, I don't think we've kept pace. I think we're going to have a leg higher overnight. Okay, so something that I do a lot of the time is reverse engineer my bias. So I go, okay, I really think this is just going to rocket higher overnight. So let's look at the times when the Aussie has moved higher after that US has rallied through Asia. Okay, so you're essentially showing a narrative in the data and then looking at what that looks like. So you can see here that what that looks like is when you look at the times of the overnight low, and sorry, let me just define these a little bit better. Time of overnight high, time of overnight low. It gets a bit tricky with all the daylight savings around the world and moving, you know, globally as well as within Australia with Brisbane and Sydney and different time zones and all the rest of it. But essentially, 4 p.m. is the aftermarket, okay? So if it's bottomed or topped for the entire rest of the night in the aftermarket, it'll say 4 p.m. 5 p.m. I generally define as the London Open, okay? So just because that's, you know, where you get a lot of volatility. So I kind of allocate that as the 5 p.m. Half of the year it is 5 p.m. The other half it might be 6 p.m. or whatever. But essentially I'm just saying, it bottomed in that volatile Europe opening hour, or it topped in that. And then obviously after that, it just goes on throughout the night. 12 a.m. is the US Open, things like that. So you can see here that, again, if we reverse engineer that, what do we got here? 14. You can see 13 out of 14 bottom in that first 2 hours, say, or definitely bottom either in the aftermarket or in that first hour of Europe. So in terms of putting that into actionable kind of strategy, again, if I was so, full-headed strong that we were going to rally 100 points overnight, and I think, the market's going to go nuts, any break of these lows, that first kind of 2 hour lows, would really get me double checking myself and having a rethink. Me personally, I just put stops below those early lows, because if it breaks, then you're really looking at, a 1 in whatever 100 chance that might happen, that it breaks those lows, turns around and comes back. So that's just the way that I kind of can interpret this data. As always, any questions, reach out. But otherwise, that is the overnight portion of the Aussie 200 Mosaic data.